when a young woman with a promising future was brutally murdered in a gated, high-security apartment. All the evidence seemed to point to one man as the killer, but the trial that followed would turn every aspect of this crime on its head, making it one of the most intriguing and controversial unsolved murder cases in South African criminal history. 17 years later, forensic experts and amateur sleuths are still divided. What really happened that summer evening in 2005? This is the mysterious case of Inge Lotz. Before we start, we would like to send our sincere condolences to the loved ones of Inge Lotz, who fell victim to this abominable act. Stellenbosch, South Africa is a scenic town surrounded by mountains and vineyards, located a 40-minute drive from Cape Town. With its oak-lined streets and rich colonial history, the picturesque town of Stellenbosch is both a food and wine capital and a lively party hub for students from the nearby Stellenbosch University. But in a country where crime rates are among the highest in the world, safety is an ever-present concern. It was definitely at the top of the mind for 22-year-old Fred Vandervyver on the evening of March 16, 2005. Fred had been trying to reach his girlfriend of 5 months, 22-year-old Inge Lotz, for hours, and now he was feeling uneasy. Inge was not the type to ignore a call or a message, and the pair had made plans for that night to discuss an argument they had had that morning. Concerned, Fred phoned Inge's mother. She told Fred that she had spoken to Inge around lunchtime that day and wondered if Inge had muted her phone so that she could study. Fred wasn't convinced. At 10:18 p.m., he made one final attempt to reach his girlfriend before telling his roommate, Marius Botha, that he was driving to Inge's apartment in Stellenbosch to check on her. It was a 40-minute drive to the apartment from Cape Town, and Marius suggested they ask a mutual friend named Christo Pretorius, who lived in Inge's neighborhood, to swing by instead. Meanwhile, Fred could drive to Inge's mother's to pick up the spare keys to the complex. By 10:30, Christo was outside Inge's apartment complex. No one was answering the intercom at apartment number 21. Christo asked another resident to buzz him in. Then he knocked several times at Inge's apartment door. There was no answer. And there was something that troubled him. The apartment was in darkness, but Inge's television was on. On a whim, Christo turned the door handle. It was unlocked. From the entrance, Christo had a clear view into the open-plan living room, and he saw something that made his heart stop. In the blue and white glow of the TV was the figure of a woman lying on the couch, strands of long hair draped over one armrest. Christo stepped closer. The motionless figure was Inge, but her head and face were covered in blood. Christo fled the home to the neighbor who had buzzed him in. While the neighbor phoned emergency services, Christo braced himself for the terrible task ahead, breaking the news to Fred that his beloved girlfriend was dead. Inge Lotz had grown up in a tight-knit family in the nearby affluent neighborhood of Welgemode. Her parents, Jan and Juanita Lotz, doted on their only child, who was a talented soprano singer, pianist, and scholar. Inge had excelled at both school and university, receiving multiple awards for academic achievement. For her bachelor's degree in actuarial science, she was listed among the top students in the Western Cape region. By 2005, Inge was well on her way to completing her master's in mathematical statistics. Her future couldn't look brighter. Inge's friends described her as vivacious and full of life, a deeply loving friend with an infectious laugh. She was bright and beautiful and a magnet for male admirers. Friends said that wherever she went, men seemed to fall for her. One of those men was fellow actuary student 22-year-old Fred Vandervyver. Fred and Inge had been classmates since their first year of their degree, but had only started dating in November of 2004. They had a lot in common. Like Inge, Fred was smart and ambitious. The youngest of 3 boys from a wealthy farming family, Fred had graduated high school close to the top of his class. He was tall and striking and exuded a quiet confidence. After finishing his honors degree, Fred had taken a job as an actuary at Old Mutual, a prominent insurance firm based in Cape Town. And by 2005, he was living in an apartment close to his work with his friend and colleague, Marius Botha. Inge was smitten with Fred. She introduced him to her parents, who gave their stamp of approval. By Christmas of that year, Inge had told her mother that Fred was the man she would marry. At the beginning of March 2005, Inge had moved into an apartment in a new development on the outskirts of Stellenbosch. The Shiraz apartment complex was still in the process of completion, with extensive ongoing construction. Like many gated communities, the complex had a remote control access, high-security gate, and high walls topped with electric wire. Fanatical about safety, Inge had waited until the security gate had been installed on both her front door and balcony doors, and burglar-proof bars on her windows before moving in. Inge enjoyed decorating her apartment, purchasing a new couch for the living room. The couch was large, and delivery workers had to lift it onto the balcony and through the balcony doors in order to get it in the apartment, breaking several tiles in the process. Inge made arrangements with a tiling contractor to repair them. The contractor arrived on the morning of Wednesday, March 16, 2005. Fred had left Inge's apartment earlier that morning for a course. When the contractor arrived, Inge was already on her way out the door and asked if he could return later that day. It was a hot day in Stellenbosch, and the town was buzzing with students attending their final exams before the Easter term break. Inge briefly met Fred before attending a lecture. She then had an early lunch with a childhood friend, Wimpy Boshoff. He would be the last of her friends to see her alive. When Inge returned to her flat at 1:15 p.m., she found several contractors preparing to access her balcony via a ladder. Inge let them in through the front door. By the time they were wrapping up, she was on the phone with her mother, who later stated that she heard Inge see them out the door, locking the security gate behind them. At 1:36 p.m., Inge sent a final message to Fred. Had a nice visit with Wimpy. Tiles have been laid. Miss you already. A receipt and surveillance footage would later show that at 2:55 p.m., Inge had picked up a burger from a Steers restaurant, then a DVD from a local rental store, and a magazine. She had then returned home and changed from her jeans into sleepwear-style shorts. No more calls would be made from her phone, and no more messages would be opened or sent. Inge would go silent. By 10:30 p.m. that night, Christo Prestorius would be entering her apartment in the dark through an unlocked door. Within hours, Inge's apartment was crawling with police officers. Inge had been brutally bludgeoned in the head by what forensic experts believed to be a hammer, then stabbed multiple times in the neck and body. An autopsy would also reveal she had been struck up to 47 times. The killer had then used her bathroom to clean up, leaving a bloodied towel on the floor and blood spatter in the sink. A single shoe print in blood had been left on the bathroom floor. There was no sign of forced entry. Valuables still lay openly on display. Inge's cell phone was still on the kitchen counter. Only a knife and the remote control for the complex had been taken. On the coffee table lay an open DVD cover, the DVD still playing on the TV long past the movie's end. Forensic experts lifted a fingerprint from that cover. That fingerprint would become the most contested piece of evidence in the controversial trial that was to follow. Everything suggested that Inge had been taken by surprise while lying on her couch reading and watching a DVD, so suddenly and with such force that she likely died where she laid on the couch. A magazine still lay open at her feet, and the remote control was in her hand. But why? And by who? The savage nature of the attack suggested that it was motivated by an uncontrollable rage. This was something personal, by someone she knew. Within hours of her death, the news had hit the media, and the smiling and beautiful Inge Lotz adorned the front cover of every newspaper across the country. Inge's distraught boyfriend, Fred, moved into the home of her devastated parents, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of their living room, which he had converted into a shrine filled with candles. On the evening before Inge's funeral, Inge's mother, Juanita, wrote a message to Fred. "Thank you for all of your love, Fred. Our hearts have been broken by our angel child. Love you. Sleep well." But just days later, they would ask him to leave their home and never return. Investigating officers learned that on the day of her murder, the power had been cut to the security gate of the complex for several hours while electricians worked on installing a fan in their garbage room. That day, there had been construction workers on the premises, as well as the tiling subcontractors who had repaired Inge's balcony. But the focus of the investigation fell on the people closest to Inge, and specifically the men who had known or dated her. Among those considered suspects were Wimpy Boshoff, an ex-boyfriend named Bram Kruger, Marius Botha, and of course, Fred Vandervijver. Fred, it turned out, had an ironclad alibi. He had been at his office in Pinehurst from 11 a.m. until 6 p.m. that day, and several eyewitnesses corroborated his presence in meetings. There was also surveillance footage captured of Fred entering and leaving the building. No footage showed him leaving the building at any other time. Both Wimpy and Bram were also swiftly ruled out. Marius Botha, however, had nothing to corroborate his alibi that he was at his apartment during the hours that Inge was killed. It also emerged that he had been in love with Inge during their first year at the university, at one point writing her a love letter described by a friend as a meter long. But there was no evidence linking Marius to the crime. Meanwhile, a man had come forth and confessed to Inge's murder. 2 weeks after the crime, 17-year-old drug dealer named Venner Carolus confessed to police that he had killed a female student while she lay on her couch. The couch was a detail which, at that point, was only known to police and her killer.
Zeg vir my, wat ek nou weet. Hoe weet jy iemand is vermoord? Was daar binne vermoord?
Ek was daar op.
Was jy op?
Ja, toe ek daar op kom, toe sien ek net die meisie lê daar.
Het jy gaan kyk voordat jy gehardloop het?
Toe hulle hardloop, toe het ek nie verstaan nie, want ek was getrek gewees.
Jy was saam met wie was jy so?
Ja.
Okay, Jacob wie?
Swanne.
Het die meisie gesien? As jy sê jy het die meisie gesien, waar het jy haar gesien?
Sy was in die voorarea op 'n rusbank waar sy gelê het. En toe ek net die bloed sien, toe het ek geweet.
Wat die opname word hier beëindig.
But Venner's story kept changing. During subsequent interviews, he said that he had not committed the murder, but had only witnessed it. She had been murdered on a Saturday, he said, when Inge was actually killed on a Wednesday. Venner was able to lead police to Inge's apartment complex, but couldn't point out her apartment. Venner then retracted his statement, stating that he was high when he had come forward. Police dismissed the confession. By then, they were focused on a different suspect, Fred Vandervijver. Police felt strongly that their perpetrator was someone that Inge knew well, a jealous, controlling boyfriend, for instance. In the minds of the press and the police, Fred couldn't have fit the profile better. Contrary to appearances, Fred and Inge's relationship had been troubled. Fred was a member of the His People Church, which held strict beliefs regarding how women should dress and public displays of affection. Fred believed that physical contact in a premarital relationship was likely to lead to sex and insisted on no intimacy with Inge. Inge was a Christian, but under Fred's behest, she joined the His People Church. Friends implied that Inge had done it under duress and was not comfortable with their teachings. On the morning of her death, Fred and Inge had fought. According to Fred, Inge had asked him if he still loved her. He assured her that he did, but agreed that the relationship had felt off for a while. He asked her to think carefully about whether she wanted to continue with him and to write him an email telling him of her feelings, which they could then discuss that evening. Inge had written a 2-page letter, which she handed to him the day of her death after his morning lecture. It had turned out to be a loving letter and was the last time he'd seen her alive, he said. But Wimpy Boshoff gave police a slightly different account. Inge, he said, had told him over lunch that day that their relationship was on the rocks. That morning, they had what she described as a hell of a fight, and something she wasn't sure they could recover from. Wimpy had told her that she was being melodramatic. She'd then done an about-face and said that she wanted to get engaged to Fred by the end of that year. Inge's father now said that he had misgivings about Fred from the start of their relationship. He had found him manipulative and controlling, he said. Juanita recalled having concerns over Fred as well. The very last time she had seen Inge, she observed bruising on her daughter's arms. Inge claimed that she had injured herself at the gym, but changed into a longer sleeve top to conceal the bruises. She'd also heard Inge arguing with Fred on the phone and asking him not to come over that weekend. Against Inge's wishes, Fred had turned up anyway. Later, when Inge had picked out a short summer dress for an upcoming event, Fred had remarked that it was something she was only to wear around him. And then there was Fred's odd behavior during the days after Inge's murder. On the night they learned of Inge's murder, Fred told police that he had been inside the Lotz family home. Juanita told police that she had found him waiting in his car outside on the street with his eyes closed. Had he not wanted to face her? That night, he told Juanita of the letter Inge had written him, describing it as a love letter. Juanita asked to see it, hoping to see the last thing her daughter had written. Fred had refused, saying it was too personal. He later handed her a short note on a small piece of paper and claimed it was the letter. It was the kind of note she had seen Inge leave for Fred before. It read, "I just wanted to say I appreciate how special you are. Thank you for your love, support, and kind heart, and that you are always prepared to listen to my little problems. I love you very, very, very much. Good luck with your day and your week, and know that Jesus is always with you." Juanita felt that Fred was lying. This did not sound like the letter Fred had described. There had also been trouble at the undertaker's. Jan and Juanita wanted Juanita's brother to identify Inge's body. But when he arrived at the morgue, Fred had already had 2 pastors from his church take care of it. Jan and Juanita were outraged. When Jan saw Fred moving clothes into Inge's wardrobe several days after the funeral, he asked Fred to leave. Lab analysis results for the fingerprint from the DVD were now confirmed to match Fred's. The print placed Fred at Inge's apartment after 3 p.m., roughly at the time of her murder. Police obtained a warrant to search Fred's home. There, they found a recently washed sports shoe, which, according to the forensics team, matched the single bloody footprint found in Inge's bathroom. Police now focused on the weapon. They asked Fred if he owned a hammer. Fred admitted to owning an ornamental hammer, which doubled as a bottle opener, and which was a Christmas gift from Inge's family. It had been left under the front seat of his car and had never been used, he said. But what of his alibi? Police pieced together Fred's final movements on the day of Inge's death, and they found a potential hole. Fred had arrived at Old Mutual around 11 a.m. and joined a workshop with 6 colleagues. At 1:10 p.m., he had logged onto a work computer and sent a message to Inge thanking her for the letter. But between 3:29 and 5:14, no phone or computer activity had been initiated by Fred. There was a window of 105 minutes between 3:30 p.m. and 5:15 when no one could account for Fred's movements. The question remained, what if he had left his place of work via the company's car park? 3 months after Inge's murder, With rumors rife that police were close to arresting Fred, Fred's lawyer advised him to hand himself in to the police, but to maintain his innocence. Fred did so and requested that he be given a lie detector test. He passed, but with enough evidence to charge him, Fred was arrested for the murder of Inge Lotz. After 2 long years, the trial of Fred Vantervijver began in February of 2007. It would last 9 months, going down in South African history as one of the country's most highly publicized and controversial trials. Fred's family had sold the family farm in order to fund his defense. Of primary importance in the case was the fingerprint. Fred's family had hired an American fingerprint expert, Pat Wertheim, and Dr. David Klatzow to examine the print. Both testified that the fingerprint had been lifted from a cylindrical surface, like a glass, and not from a flat surface, like a DVD case.
Number one, he didn't label the fingerprints. You always label the fingerprint that you pick up at the scene of the crime with the time, the place, the date, and the surface on which you pick it up. He didn't do that. And those were only labeled sometimes quite a significant time after the event, when the exact memory of what had happened and how you lifted them, etc., had faded. So by this stage now, the fingerprint was under serious attack. The net result of that was that the police then took it back for a second look to some of their fingerprint experts in Pretoria, who agreed with the defense, saying that the fingerprint was in fact not lifted from the DVD, but lifted from a glass. Now, of course, there are many glasses, and there's no problem about Fred being in the flat and leaving his fingerprint on the glass. The DVD was the absolute killer had he left his fingerprint on the DVD. And at the opening of the trial, the prosecutor, Christenus van der Vyver, strangely named van der Vyver, but spelled differently, but he told the judge that they were not relying on the fingerprint for a conviction.
No expert would be able to re-examine the original fingerprint. In a mind-boggling show of incompetence or convenience, the police had returned the DVD to the rental store. It was just one of a litany of bizarre mistakes that would be revealed, starting the moment officers were called to the scene, when at least 7 police officers were seen walking around the apartment, compromising the entire crime scene. Still, the prosecution pushed its case. They argued that Fred's movements could not be corroborated for the 105 minutes that afternoon, during which time he could have gotten into his car, which was parked in the basement, evaded CCTV cameras, driven the 29 miles to Inge's apartment, attacked her, and left within 15 minutes, before making the 40-minute journey back. The defense argued that Fred could not possibly have committed the crime and cleaned himself up in such a narrow time frame. Colleagues who had seen him that afternoon had described him as calm and relaxed. The 2-page letter Inge had written Fred was submitted as evidence of Fred having lied to Inge's parents and of a motive of jealousy. In the letter, Inge apologized for the fight they had had. She asked him how to be his perfect girlfriend and wrote that she would never cheat on him, then crossed out that sentence and wrote that she would never do anything behind his back. The defense argued that Fred's sensitivity towards Inge's parents' pain was now being used against him. Inge had referenced her father's drinking in the letter. Then there was the shoe print evidence. Superintendent Bruce Bartholomew stated to the court that Bill Bodziak, known for writing the textbook on blood evidence and shoe prints, had confirmed that the blood mark in the bathroom was made by Fred's shoe. No such claim had ever been made. Bodziak was then called as an expert witness by Fred's defense team, stating to the court that the blood mark was not a match for Fred's, and possibly not even a shoe print. As for the weapon, it contained no traces of blood or DNA, and experts testified that it did not match the size of Inge's wounds. And what of the construction workers and the tilers, the last people to see Inge alive? Police had failed to take statements from them. Soon afterwards, the construction company had been liquidated, and the illegal employees who had worked at the complex were untraceable. Police had also never shared with the defense the confession that came from Venner Carolus, who had retracted his statement after police had offered to drop charges against him for car theft if he retracted his statement. In November of 2007, Fred Vandervijver was acquitted of the murder of Inge Lotz. In his closing comments, Judge Dion Van Zyl said that he had never experienced such a lack of discipline by the police at a crime scene, and sympathized with Inge's loved ones for the state failing to find someone to be held accountable. The Lotz family went on to file a civil lawsuit against Fred for emotional damage. They dropped the suit in May of 2009 and later offered a $1 million reward for anyone with information on Inge's death. In 2010, Fred won a malicious prosecution suit against the South African Police Services for over $2 million. However, just 3 years later, the Supreme Court overturned the ruling. Several books have been written in the years since the trial. In the controversial book Bloody Lies, brothers Thomas and Calvin Mollett, two amateur sleuths, challenged the justice of Fred Vandervijver's acquittal. Many forensic experts disagree, describing the case as the result of a broken criminal justice system in which one family were unjustly prosecuted and another left without answers or closure. Nearly 2 decades later, Juanita Lotz says the pain of their loss has not abated with time, saying, "When Inge died, my soul died." If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.